Hi everyone, this is Tina Schmidt. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to do a Japanese pond today. What I've already done here is used a liquid frisket for the stones and for the concrete lantern in the background. And I've made the stones smaller as they go back in space, and we'll have a focal point along that pathway there. So the colors are lemon yellow, Hansa yellow, raw sienna, organic vermilion, ultramarine, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, permanent red, burnt sienna, sepia, and or burnt umber, and then maybe a neutral tint or something in the darker area there. I might add that later. And so I'm going to start with the background. And I'm going into the lighter foliage. I usually make up my own green by mixing my blue and my yellows. And I'm sorry about it being off screen. I'm still dealing with a camera issue. I'm using some of these brushes here. They are round, and I've got this flat hog hair brush. I don't know if I'll use that in this one, but you'll see as we move along. I'll give a list of brushes below. So I'm starting with my green in the background, the greens and yellows into the background, and it's loosely done. I'm trying to get the idea that the sunshine is coming in from the back there. And my darker green is going to be around the lantern, and there it's a better shot. And I'm just coming in with this Chinese calligraphy brush. It's the kind of brush, it has sort of like it could be a squirrel hair. Sometimes they say it's weasel hair, but it's a real fine hair, and you can spread the tip out so it's kind of straggly. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. So I'm doing wet on dry, and then I'm coming in again with wet on wet and letting the colors bleed together. So and now let's see, I'm trying to remember what brush I pull out here. Yeah, the hog hair brush. You can get some interesting textures with this. It's a very stiff brush. I'm making sort of a reddish color, like a mud, but not really. What I'm doing is just allowing the colors to blend on the paper. And I didn't like the way that hog hair brush was going. I decided to go back to the calligraphy brush. The hog hair brush was a bit too big and heavy in this case. So by just dotting here and there for the coloration of my foliage, I'm able to let the colors bleed in one into another. And you'll see as the painting goes, I'll come back over it in different layers as it dries. And sometimes you cannot get it all in one shot. It's sometimes better to let certain things dry and then come back over it. Now, so you could get variations in the foliage. That green was a little too bright. I brought the intensity down into more of an olive or a drabber green and began to rework that area. It was too artificial looking, and I didn't want it looking like plastic foliage, so I added a little bit more of the burnt sienna and sort of muted the brightness. And since I want that Japanese lantern to pop, I want that concrete lantern to come out a bit, it's a good idea to paint the foliage behind it darker. I'll be taking off that frisket. It's already dried. I'll take it off and then paint that concrete lantern in a little bit. So again, I'm just dabbling around using the edges, the tip, the edges, and the side of that brush. It's okay if the tip is split. I want that kind of organic look to it. I'm not looking for a fine tip. And that's even better than a round brush, because this weasel hair, or sometimes they have squirrel hair, it makes it so it can just spread apart very easily to get what the textures you're looking for. So now these are some stones I'm working on. I really enjoy painting rocks. I love painting rocks. I love their textures, and sometimes I'll go hiking with my husband and come back with a bag of rocks. And I'll just look at the rocks for a long time, and I'll see how their beautiful colors are, the striations of the rocks. Sometimes they look pitted, sometimes they look sandy. They have different colors running through them, and it's, for me, I really enjoy that. So you'll see me come in here and I'll put some texture on there. I'll speckle it up a bit, as you'll see later. And this is sort of the edge of the Japanese pond here. I'm starting to work on some of the reflections now as we move towards the water. And that's a small round brush. And oh, I guess I'm using the flat brush. It's a slanted flat brush. So it's broad in one direction and it's very thin in the other. It's very flat. And I'm just painting in the steps now with kind of a violet I mixed up with the blue. And a little bit of the cobalt violet. And now I'm coming in with a combination of cobalt blue and cerulean blue. And I'm adding the very slight amount of titanium white. And that is to make the water not look so transparent. It gives it a very slight milkiness, not muddiness, just very slight, to hint as if clouds are being reflected in that water. And so I'm varying it so that it's not all one value. I've got, the different lines running, the different light and dark running through there. And then I'm coming in with a bit more cobalt blue and a little ultramarine as well. Cobalt blue doesn't make a very good dark anything. If you mix it to try to get, let's say, a black, it's not going to work. But ultramarine will work when you're making black color. You can mix ultramarine with a red and maybe burnt sienna, and it can give you a very interesting dark black color. But you can also use neutral tint or sepia or burnt umber with ultramarine to get a variation of a kind of dark color, black color. So while my water is setting up, and going back over the plants again, and now that the plants have been dry, I can come in now and start working some of the details. Now I'm working wet on dry. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you can now go in and start putting in shadows and different values underneath the foliage. You can always tint a color in shadow by using a little bit more of the same color with maybe a brown or a blue. It depends if you want that shadow value to go cooler or warmer. If you shadow with blue, you're going to make a cooler shadow. If you shadow with, let's say, burnt sienna or burnt umber, you're going to have a warmer shadow. So it's kind of important to pay attention. What color is your foliage? If it's cool, then you would probably want to use a cool shadow color. Okay, now my painting is dry. I'm using a very large photograph eraser to at least start some of this process. I won't go through the whole thing in the video here, but I am pulling off and peeling off a lot of what's around that, all of that frisket. Now I've taken off all the frisket on the stones and the steps and the lantern, and now I'm coming in with my hog hair brush, stiff hog hair brush. I'm mixing a gray tone with the blue and a little bit of burnt sienna to make a kind of mud color. I'm varying the stone color. I want it to kind of move around, so I'm not painting it with one solid color. I'm using these different colors, blue and burnt sienna, and then I'm letting them blend themselves out onto the stones. For the side of the stones, I come in with a little bit darker color using Sepia or burnt umber with the blue, and or maybe some neutral tint. So it can vary. If your stones are more gray, you'll use probably more neutral tint on their shadow side. If the stones are a little more brown, you could use blue and burnt sienna, like ultramarine, but add more burnt sienna. You kind of want your shadow value, your shadow sides to match whatever the sunny side is, only in a darker range. You kind of want to keep it in the same color family. And now I'm just touching up with a slanted flat brush. Some people call it a rigger brush. It's like a small flat brush that's slanted at an angle, so you can get some interesting things there. You can see I'm dipping into the blue, dipping into the burnt sienna, dipping into the sepia sometimes. I've got some color mixing on the side there for that shadow side. Now I haven't touched the reflections in the water yet. I'm just hitting the sides of the stones here and establishing their shape. And I'm coming back in and touching the water a bit here. Now I'm touching up some of the foliage again. And dropping in my first shadow lines on that lantern, that concrete lantern. It's okay if the edges around it are a little rough, because I'll come in over the background again to sharpen it up. Right now it looks a little bit raggedy. And then you can only push the brush and the paint on the paper so far. You have to let it dry and come back at it again. So I hit the lantern, and then later I come back at it again, layer by layer. Once it's dry, I might go back at it, and like I'm doing here, I've had some downtime to let it dry. Or I might move off to another part of the painting and then come back again on it. Now it's starting to really pop, which is nice. I have to be careful too not to be static in the foliage, because sometimes you can make the same strokes over and over and it begins to look fake. So it's good to vary the lines. It's good to use different part of the brush. It's good to not get into a habit of constant mimicking the same thing. So that's why I've put these vertical bushes in there, just to help give it a little more height. It is a vertical painting, and I wanted to reinforce that idea of this vertical direction to draw the eye into the scene and upward into the back of the painting. So we don't have that flat feeling when we hit that lantern. The top of the lantern sort of suggests something to stop the eye from going upward. So by creating vertical shrubs in the background, we keep the eye in movement with the rest of the painting, coming from the lower foreground to the middle ground into the background as we follow the stones out and then into the garden. So the steps I wasn't real happy with the steps. They were too sharp, the color contrast. I wasn't finished with them yet, but I also decided that the purple was a bit bright, so I brought it down and made it look a little more stone color and gave it some reflection and sort of put them in their place so they weren't competing with the lantern or the background. You'll see here as I begin to work with the steps, they find their place in the composition and they don't jump out as much, which is great. It's what I wanted. So now that most of my water is dry, I'm coming in with the pond reflections from the foliage above it. And then I wet my brush and drag it downward using a thin flat brush. I wet it with water and then I drag it downward to create the illusion of the water reflection. So I'll wet it, drag it down while it's still wet, and then dry off my brush and do it again and again a few times. This just sort of creates a texture on the water surface. And now I'm blending some of that wet on wet, and then also going back over to enhance some of my shadows underneath. So those are reflective shadows, mirroring the things above, but from an underneath point of view. It's like a mirror, so you're seeing the underside, which would be dark. You're not going to see the sunny side, because the sunny side is where we are looking down on the plants. So you're seeing the underside of the plants because it's like a mirror effect on the water. And now I'm doing the same with the stones. Now I'm not working so much with the sides of the stones in as much as I'm working with their reflection on top of the on the water surface. And I'm using variations of the blue for that, along with a tinting, either sepia or neutral tint or blue and burnt sienna, blue and maybe burnt umber. If you do this painting, or you know, you'll see when you do it how you're going to control that temperature of that reflection. You can use more browns or more blues depending on what suits you for the mood of the painting or the color of your stones. Now I'm speckling. I'm using a toothbrush and I'm speckling and splattering. I take a wet paper towel and wring it out, and then when I don't want, wherever I don't want those splatters, I'll quickly soak them up with that paper towel. And take that toothbrush and I splatter on it and then lift it where I don't want it. And now I'm just touching up with probably a number 4 round brush, just to get the shapes of the stones a little bit better. You can see as I push those stones back, the steps, I mean, they start to find their place where they're supposed to be, and I dim them down, tinting them a little bit with that drab green because they're picking up shadow reflection, and this puts them in their place. They're not popping out looking out of place. They just sort of blend into the background. It's important to understand about reflections of things. Light is picked up and color is picked up on things in the surroundings, so everything is sort of reflecting off of everything else. But it may not be obvious, but after a while you begin to see it and notice it. And I'm just accenting some of the shadows to push the scenes back a little bit, that foliage back there. I'm doing some more splattering now with dipping into some white or some gray or some darker tone, just varying the textures of the stone. And I'll come in right afterwards with that wet paper towel just to blot out some of the splatter that gets a little out of hand there. I work very quickly while it's still wet to lift some of it. Sometimes we get some big chunky splatters and they're not very good. So I'll just lift them with a wet paper towel. Make sure it's not so wet that it's going to drip. You just want it damp, enough to lift whatever you've splattered in the wrong spot. And then I'm just coming in with maybe some texture lines on the stones. Okay, so now as I start working with this, the final phases here, I will take a flat, stiff, small detail brush and begin to lift the paint out. So I'm using a kind of a rigger brush here, but it wasn't stiff enough, so I had to switch brushes. But I'm lifting the paint, so I've gone over where I have already painted. I take it, rinse it in water, dry it out a little bit, and then I start dabbing over and dragging it back and forth across a particular area on the painting to get some water surface lines. And it makes a very nice effect to lift that water color paint off and just look like you're getting these surface ripples. It really helps push that illusion of the water. So I'm using a flat brush. As you can see, I'm just lifting. I switch to another brush, just dragging, wetting it, going across, and then lifting that color out to get some surface lines. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty much almost done now. I don't want to noodle in there too much because then you can actually work against yourself by trying to play around too much. So anyway, it's pretty much done, and I'm just touching up now with some twigs and some branches, maybe a little bit in there just to pull out some detail, not much. So we're pretty much done. Just Just a little touch up in the background. I'm touching up with Cerulean blue for that sky, and then dabbling it here and there for that blue sky to come down into the background. Okay, so the tape comes off and I will sign it, and I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you return, and if you have any questions, please leave them down for me. You can email me, you can leave questions down below. I'll try to answer them. And thank you so much, and God bless you. Be safe. I know it's kind of crazy out there, but have fun when you paint and just enjoy. Appreciate all that you're doing in your creativity. Yep, looks fair to me. Please like and subscribe and return to me, and maybe we'll paint some more. Have a great day.